8-bit chef.
The video game industry is known for being cutthroat. For every game company, there are 5 more wanting to make a bigger and better game. This competition leads to market trends that usually drive the industry toward a certain sameness that arguably was most visible in the late 2000s, a time at which third-person action games were a dime a dozen, and you couldn't go anywhere without hearing about the latest World War II shoot-fest. Despite this, not everything that came out was inherently stale, and they were gems buried beneath the piles of dirt. Today's game is a diamond in the rough amongst a flood of similar games. From the now defunct Pandemic Studios is a game that is the definition of a swan song if there ever was one. So I ask you, why haven't you played The Saboteur? Released on December 8th, 2009, The Saboteur was published by EA and was the final game developed by Pandemic Studios. It received generally positive scores, but its sales on the other hand, not so great. The game sold an estimated 1.06 million units across all platforms. Similar games of the time, such as Just Cause 2 and Mafia 2, greatly outsold it. And even Pandemic's own Mercenaries 2, released just 1 year prior, matched Saboteur's combined sales on the 360 alone. So why did The Saboteur sell so poorly by comparison? Well, prior to developing The Saboteur, Pandemic was tasked with working on the Dark Knight tie-in game, but a series of bad management decisions ended up with the game's cancellation. The lack of a tie-in game with the movie cost Warner Bros. An estimated $100 million in missed revenue, a bill that EA paid with cash and Pandemic with their reputation. Pair that with a buggy PC launch and EA cutting support just a few months in, and you have a recipe for failure. So why play the game? With all the other games out there, games that sold significantly better, what makes the Saboteur stand apart? The answer is its visual style. Taking place in Nazi-occupied France, the Saboteur's visuals lend to its overall narrative. Upon starting, the world is devoid of any color, accented only by the red of Nazi armbands and banners throughout the city. This punctuates the enemy presence in Paris and gives a sense of repression and strife. Not only do you see the oppression of the French, you can actively feel it. This lack of color serves as a visual representation of the city, the people, and their lack of will to fight back against Nazi occupation. It is only when you off a high-ranking Nazi official or destroy a building of importance that color comes flooding back to areas of the city. In areas of color, night becomes day, Parisians congregate and talk happily, and the French resistance stands strong. Whereas monochromatic areas represent desolation, hopelessness, and Nazi control, areas of color represent prosperity, hope, and enlivenment. In these areas, the resistance will help you fight back against the Nazis should you be attacked. This visual styling beautifully illustrates the themes presented in the story. The story stars Sean Devlin, a rough-and-tumbled Irish race car mechanic who is loosely based on the real-life William Grover Williams, a Grand Prix motor driver and English special agent. After being cheated out of a big win by German racer Kurt Dierker, Sean and his best friend Jules sneak onto Kurt's estate and sabotage his prized race car, after which the two are promptly captured. As it turns out, Dierker is actually a colonel in the Third Reich and believes that Sean and Jules are British spies. When Sean refuses to divulge any information, Dierker kills Jules right in front of him. Shortly after, Sean escapes to Paris with Jules' family. Through a series of events, Sean is drafted into the French resistance and eventually roped into helping the British Special Service fight back against the Nazi regime, all the while seeking revenge on Kurt for the death of his best friend. Now, while a revenge story set during World War II may seem like a superficial excuse to kill Nazis and blow things up, there are actually a lot of thematic undertones throughout if you look carefully enough. One of the major themes is reminiscent of the ideas that author James Allen wrote on. He who would accomplish little must sacrifice little. He who would achieve much must sacrifice much. He who would attain highly must sacrifice greatly. Sacrifice for the greater good is discussed heavily by Luke, the leader of the resistance, saying,
"Our cause is more important than any one person."
While most games only talk about sacrifice, the Saboteur actively demonstrates this through the actions of the resistance visionary leader, willing to sacrifice even his own men to make sure his plans don't fall apart. There are other topics, such as revenge, guilt, and even the acceptance of death, but going into detail would spoil the plot, so I'll leave those for you to discover. All these deep topics are nuanced into the game's narrative under the guise of a game about blowing things up, and that is not something that many games can do. As a third-person action-adventure game, The Saboteur scratches all the itches that a typical gamer may have. Do you like guns? There are plenty, some accurate to the period and some not so much. There are plenty of balls-to-the-wall gunfights that are sure to net you your daily dose of lead. Are you a fan of stealth? Well, you can play most missions stealthily. If you kill a Nazi using your hands, you can put on his uniform and use that to sneak around unnoticed. Are you a gearhead? Well, you'll be happy to know that there are plenty of driving sections throughout the game. Hell, you can even compete in races as an optional side mission. Speaking of side missions, how do you like them? This game has a ton of optional side missions for you to pursue at your leisure. Are you a completionist? Well, lucky for you, there were over 1,400 free play targets. That is, tanks, watchtowers, propaganda speakers, and much more for you to destroy. All the hallmarks of a great action game are here. Now, the Saboteur may not be for everyone. Sean's brash overuse of profanity may be a turnoff for some, and so might Robert Atkindown's laughably bad Irish accent.
I'm fucking Irish.
Some people may not like that the game is historically inaccurate, but that's okay. Artistic license is important in games like this, without which the game would be far less exciting. While it may have a few imperfections, the game has a lot of character. With its neo-noir style, fun gameplay, and a whole city to reclaim, the Saboteur is definitely worth checking out.